Welcome to the Youth Ministry in the Vine podcast. I'm Kyle, pastor of family ministry at Old North Church in Canfield, Ohio, and author of Youth Ministry in the Vine, a ministry mind shift for discipling the next generation, published by Matthias Media. This podcast exists to equip youth pastors and volunteers to build biblical, sustainable, and contextual youth ministries. Welcome to episode 1 of the Youth Ministry in the Vine podcast. This first season is all about just welcoming you to the Youth Ministry in the Vine ministry mindset. This podcast exists to equip youth pastors and youth volunteers to build biblical, sustainable, and contextual youth ministries. I'm here today with what I'm calling the home team, Team A, Pastor Marty and Pastor Cy, who for the rest of this, we'll just go first name basis, Marty and Cy. Yep. Guys, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Honored.
Now, the three of us have known each other for about 10 years. I've been a pastor at Old North Church for 10 years. Marty, I think I met you when I came to interview one time.
You did.
And I think I realized your sarcasm very quickly.
I don't think I'm sarcastic, but other people tell me otherwise.
That's what a sarcastic person would say.
Oh, is that what they would say?
Yeah.
That's true.
Right.
So Marty is a pastor at Old North Church also, and we've worked together for about 10 years. Yeah. And then Cy is our pastor of middle school ministry, and we've worked together now for 5 years, over 5 years.
Yeah, definitely crossing that mark.
Which in the youth ministry landscape is a long time.
It's like dog years, right?
Yeah, dog years. That's right, yeah. And so another thing that is fun about this conversation being the first one on the Youth Ministry in the Vine podcast is, Marty, you have 4 children. And all 4 either were or currently are in our youth ministry at Old North Church.
Yes, and I'm very grateful. And I'm not just saying that. Like, it has been a great blessing and, of course, a great challenge, right?
Yeah.
Not only their PKs, but they know that when I go to the office, so to speak, I'm talking to their pastors. And so I've tried to guard that carefully, but it's, I would say, as a whole, been a net wonderful blessing.
Yeah, and I think even for me, now being at the church for 10 years, I was thinking your 2 oldest kids are both freshmen in college now. And I have some pictures with them when they were really young and looked very different than they do now. But then just a week ago from the time we're recording, I was at a coffee shop nearby, and I recognized you weren't there, but I recognized it was your van, the Sweeney Mobile. And sure enough, it was one of your daughters got out and just yelled my name across, and I was like, wow, she went from being a little girl in the church to now in college, but still will say hi to her youth pastor.
Yeah, it's a great blessing for you, right?
Yeah.
That she's after your ministry and she still goes out of her way to say hi.
Yeah.
That's great.
I mean, I was able to survive. I think my first year, they were in 8th grade.
Oh, yes.
And some of my earliest memories are their very strong opinions on how dodgeball should be run.
I don't know where they get their opinions, their strong opinions. I don't know.
So this is episode 1 of the podcast. Again, the 3 words we're using to guide the whole thing, but especially season 1, which is just an introduction to this idea of youth ministry in the Vine, is we want to help youth pastors and volunteers, not just those who are paid, although we know there are youth pastors who are not paid, but not just the person leading the ministry as like the figurehead, but also all of those who are helping lead, volunteers also, to build biblical, sustainable, and contextual youth ministries, which I think leads us to, let's just talk a little bit about the youth ministry landscape. So here we are, we're 3 pastors. Marty, can you just explain for those listening what your role is at the church, but then also what you do with Matthias Media, which ties into this too?
Yeah, thank you. So my role at the church is I oversee our apprenticeship program, and I think my official title is called Pastor of Training. And in one sense, it's a little bit of a misnomer because training is, we're all trainers, right? We're training people in righteousness with the Word of God, prayerfully dependent on the Spirit of God. But I have a specific charge to help think about, help our leaders think about how they can invest in others to have more gospel workers.
Yes.
And then specifically, we oversee an apprenticeship program where we bring in people, some from outside, some internally, to put them on staff full-time, to train them to what ministry looks like full-time, the rigors, the joys, the struggles, before they maybe commit their whole lives, the rest of their lives for that.
And then tell us, so you do that, but then you also run Matthias Media.
Yep, so Matthias Media is a publishing and resourcing ministry that really wants to equip disciple-making disciples, and both with the motivation, the persuasion to persuade them that all Christians are not just to be disciples, but disciple makers, but also to equip them with the tools that are Bible-based to help them read the Bible with someone else, train someone in evangelism, do evangelism, things like that.
And so Matthias Media, as you heard in the introduction, is the publisher of the book that this podcast is coming out of, Youth Ministry in the Vine, and we'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's talk just about the youth ministry the youth ministry landscape, which Cy and I live in every day as pastors. You live in as a parent, but also as you're training people all across really the world to do ministry. You have kind of a unique perspective on the youth ministry landscape. So Cy, let's just start out with you. As we think about the youth ministry landscape today, what are a few things that come to mind?
I think even just in the past week, I had several conversations with parents and students about how technical and online engagement is at an all-time high, but the social interaction is at an all-time low. And how the more they interact with AI, social media, video games, all sorts of things with media and things that are consuming their attention in that sense, they're kind of inversely related, right? The more you do that, then the less skills you get socially, and the less you're hanging out with other people, the less you're being with them, and you learn those little skills over time. But we're seeing an inverse relation there, and I think seeing that a lot.
And these are even
parents
of middle school
There's
students.
more and more younger kids I'm seeing have phones and smartphones and things that, I mean, when I was a kid, when I was younger, which I know was not quite as long ago as Marty, obviously that time was a little different, but still seeing younger and younger kids have phones. And the skills that they're not learning or are learning through that, but also the voices that they're getting through that, whether it's the YouTube algorithm that's feeding them. Those voices are so much louder to them now, and they're hearing anything and everything, which is kind of scary.
Yeah, it's interesting just to say, I mean, I was a youth minister 25 years ago. So,
Marty, I wish. I mean, we could have been in your. I'm 35 as we record this, so I was 10 then. So I was too young to be in your youth group.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. But it's interesting. I was listening to a talk from a pastor to other pastors. I was just listening on my way here in 1998. This is a guy named Peter Adam, and he was referencing a study, knowing that kids growing up watching TV are less social. So this is, in one sense, nothing new under the sun. Now, the unique thing is, of course, is that when I watch TV, I watch it with my family. In a room like this, almost. We're all together. We're talking. There is a huge difference. So it's like it's the same, but quite different.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, one of the biggest prayer requests I get now from parents is they want their kids to have good, godly friends. But not only is it part of this phase of life, whether it's middle school or to high school, that they're learning how to be friends and what that looks like, but I think it's only made worse. The problem is made worse when you have so much more technological advancements and AI and other things that replace some of that, but miss out on the benefits you actually get from being a person.
This became real to me several years ago, and I think it was actually after COVID, because I feel like we could probably draw a line in youth ministry landscape, like before COVID and then after COVID. But I think it was after COVID where two kids in the youth group, a boy and a girl, were supposedly dating. And I say supposedly because I'm not sure exactly where that was, but they were supposedly dating, but I never saw them talk in person. And then as I was talking to their parents and just observing, I found out they were talking while playing video games together all the time when they were in separate houses where they couldn't see each other face to face. But then when they were together, they weren't able to really carry conversations on the same way socially. And when we think if that's the case in dating or that's the case in friendship, obviously that's going to be a difficulty as we build up the family of God in the church, where if kids are struggling talking to each other, one difficulty is going to be able to talk about other ministries. I think about at Old North, Marty, and maybe you can even take us into this a little bit. One word we like to use is intergenerational. I think about a guy who used to work at our church, Bob, who's now with the Lord. Just thinking about, I think when I look at the youth ministry landscape, so often in the past, and I think even present, youth are segmented. I know when I came to Old North, it wasn't a dying youth ministry that I took over, but people always talked about the youth being back there. I don't know exactly what they meant by that. I think they meant like the gym or where the youth, but back there. But can you just talk a little bit about the idea of intergenerational youth ministry? Because I think it's kind of reaches the heartbeat of a lot of youth pastors today.
I think so. And I remember Bob making the really important, it could be semantical point that it's not multi-generational, it's intergenerational. And I appreciate that. We try to use language carefully because it means something, right? Multi-generational is just simply like we've got people of different age groups. Intergenerational, we're trying to kind of put together. And I think, boy, it's what a blessing it is. I can just, again, speak to my the blessing that I have that people of all ages have invested in my children.
Yes.
Not just your age,
Yes.
your age, but people even my age, even older. I think we have Brother Terry or other like that who are, and it's great.
Yeah, and I think just an example of this that I think those who are watching or listening, that is just beautiful is, so your son last year as we're recording this was a senior in high school, and we had youth ministry on Wednesday nights, and he's coming down, and Malachi and I, we read, I think, 15 books together outside of youth ministry, and we're just, the Lord was at work, but he got injured in either track and field or cross country. And I remember coming out of the youth room, going to the check-in table, and an older guy in the church was like wrapping his leg and like helping him try to heal from this injury. And like that was intergenerational. If we were just silos, or Cy and I use the terms Venn diagrams a lot. If we were just circles that were totally segmented, there would never be that crossover. And here, your son was getting spiritual input from a lot of different people, but then he's getting wrapped up, and he had ice on his shins, and it was like, wow, this is a picture of what happens when the family of God is intergenerational rather than multi-generational.
Yeah, and I think about this. It's actually people look at our church, and because we have a dedicated pastor for high school or family, middle school, and they think, you guys can do something, but it's that we can't as a small church.
Of course.
If I'm a small church pastor. But actually on this point, I feel that it's actually the thing that's the hardest to do, because we have the resources and the space that just go be who you want, play your games in that room, and the rest of us can operate here quite physically, literally. And your example is such a good one, right? That we're all together, and it's a great blessing.
Yeah, and I think even if we were to go beyond that, Cy, one thing you and I talk about, so the setting where we're working now, there are a lot of kids, dozens and dozens and dozens of kids. But we both worked in settings that were smaller before, and we would say, just like we would encourage anyone listening to this, there are big churches that are healthy and small churches that are healthy, but there's also big churches that are unhealthy and small churches that are unhealthy. The size of the church doesn't decide the health of the church. But with that, one thing we have to figure out a lot of times in youth ministry is, we want to be doctrinally sound, and we're going to talk about a lot of this in season 1 of this podcast. But we want to be doctrinally sound, but we also want to be fun, right? And sometimes I think in theological tribes, it's like, here we are sitting in a studio, and if you're watching this, we got theology books here, study Bibles, and it's like, I think one thing we are growing at is we can be theologically deep, but we can also have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, depending on everybody's personality, is different. You're not supposed to be someone you're not.
Oh, amen.
Right? But to still allow it to grow you.
Does that mean Marty and I, it's okay that we don't play disc golf?
I don't know. That's a whole other podcast episode that we might need to get into there. But yeah, fun and deep theology can go together.
Yeah, and I think, I was just sitting with a student at a coffee shop. They didn't have school the other day, and we were talking about the most important things. We were working through one of Matthias Media's resources, 2 Ways to Live, and we're walking through it. And this student had not been to church for long. And as we're doing this, I was thinking, well, we need to be cautious that we're not just, baiting people into church for fun. But this deep conversation we had, which ended with the kid saying, I learned a lot today, and the Lord is evidently working in his life. It started because we were having fun together, because he came to our church after a player on the varsity football team, and then came to our church afterwards. And now it led to this, which we'll get into a lot later. Marty, as we think about just ministry landscape, you probably don't remember this conversation, and it didn't originate with you, which I think is some of our best ideas when we take others, because I've heard it other ways. But I remember I came to Old North, I was 25, and I remember being in a pastor's meeting, and at the time there were 6 of us, and Nick, our senior pastor, said, can everyone go around and give Kyle encouragement? Now, Marty's really thinking right now, what did I tell him? But you gave me the classic, you either use 5 years or 10 years, that don't underestimate what you could do in a long run, or overestimate what you can do in a short run. Yeah. And I just think for me, even when I came to the church, I remember being honest with the elders that I didn't think this was going to be I wasn't planning on doing youth ministry long term. And here we are now at the time of this recording, about 10 years in, wrapping up the 10th school year. And I think you've had an interesting perspective, both as one of my coworkers and as a parent of kids in the youth ministry to kind of just see how, again, it wasn't dying when we got here, but you've just kind of seen how we've shifted culture as time went on. Can you just explain to the listeners what you've witnessed?
Yeah, what I've seen is that the things that make up culture have shifted to be emphasizing the things that make up faithful ministry as a whole.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is that, of course, youth ministry is different, right?
Yeah.
Youth ministry is different, but in one sense, it's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's word, prayer, and people.
Yeah.
Over time. And so what you guys have done is saying that, we know the word of God drives growth, and what we're after in students is maturity, and we have to have a fair, reasonable assessment. What is a mature 8th grader, Christian 8th grader, and a mature Christian 11th grader? And also, we also have immature, non-Christian 8th graders in the mix in the same. And so I think it's intentionality.
Yep.
It's word-centered without taking it. Sorry, let me say it this way. It's word-centered very seriously and soberly, but we've already mentioned this. We don't take ourselves too seriously and everything else.
That's right.
Because I remember, so I've been doing Matthias Media for 20 years, and I remember hearing people would call and say, hey, do you have resources for youth? And we would make some recommendations. But I've had other people call and we don't believe in doing fun. We don't believe in doing youth stuff. Like, we have our kids reading Puritan paperbacks. Awesome stuff.
Right.
But the youth ministry you guys have developed is meeting the kids where they're at, but also not leaving them there.
Yes.
And that then makes up a really important culture of, one, being intentional, serious, sober, and also fun and engaging of where each kid is at.
Yeah, and I think one of my favorite things about our culture at Old North, and as you listen to this podcast more and more, is we realize that we don't have it all figured out. And so as we'll talk about the book here in a little bit, and as I've been writing it, I'm glad it's been a process over years of writing it, because God is teaching us and God is gracious in growing us as we minister to people. Which, one last thing I want to talk about the youth ministry landscape side, I want to just throw this out to you and have you respond, is one of the things I read about in the book and that I just say to people all the time is that the noun pastor is more important than the adjective youth. And when we think about youth ministry and youth pastors, oftentimes we talk about this segmentation, but one of my favorite things about the ministry we do together is the noun pastor is what we do, or even if you're listening or watching, you're not the youth pastor, you're the person who's doing the work, but what we're doing in ministry is more important than the age that we're focusing on. Can you just respond to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things I'm always trying to grow with, I think we're growing with a lot here at Old North, is really the full circle of ministry, right? Where it's the student we're ministering to, yes, but it's also the deployed volunteer leader, as well as the personal youth worker, right, that's on the staff, and the parent, right? All the way around, the full circle ministry of engaging the family. And at the end of the day, it's discipleship, right? It's discipleship, pointing them to Jesus, helping him make sense to them and caring for them in that way at their age, where they're at, not leaving them there, meeting where they're at, but taking them where they need to go. And that certainly happens, and that's a key dynamic of our team.
Yeah, and I would say, just thinking of this now, that one of my favorite things over the past 10 years is Marty and I had conversations early on. So the ministry apprenticeship program, which I call, I don't know if it's liked or not, I call it the internship on steroids, because it's more than an internship, but it's also I love it when they come. One thing we have these apprentices serving kids ministry and youth ministry all around women's just so that they can get a landscape of what's happening, and they can know that one day if they're leading a church, that serving in the nursery is important, right?
Yeah.
We need to care for the whole family. But also, when I started here, we were talking, what would it look like if students we have now in the youth group would be apprentices and maybe even pastors one day? And to what you're saying, Sai, because we're ministering to whole families, we're now seeing God answer that prayer.
We are. I remember being in Australia. Matthias Media did start out of Australia, but another thing that happened in the same kind of time was their idea. It's developed in something called ministry training strategy, where they're trying to recruit people to give up their kind of pursuit of careers and being an accountant or engineer. Nothing wrong with that, but to give up for full-time gospel work. And I talked to a guy named Ben who runs MTS, and he said, I tell him what we want to do at Old North, and he said, great, you're 6 years out from that. And he said, you need to be thinking of high school juniors about where they're at and how in 6 years after college they can go and be apprentices and gospel workers. But what we've been able to do to think even below, so I ran a breakout session at a conference that we run called Equipped, where we've called it various things over the years, but functionally, what does God want me to do for my life? Or what if I'm thinking about gospel ministry? We had a 5th grader named Kyle show up, and our friend Beth on staff said, could you reasonably speaking, Kyle could be our pastor one day, this 5th grader. But it's also what we want.
And we're seeing it. Now he's in high school. And I remember when I heard that he's maybe desiring to go into vocational ministry, one day he came in early on freshman year, and I said, hey, you're going to come up and pray today. He's like, okay, I can do that. And we're seeing, and I do think, as I said earlier, some people would say, okay, that's just because you have a big church, but I believe this is the ministry that the common denominator is understanding that it's, like you said earlier, it's word work, that the Spirit of God helps apply the word of God to the people of God, and we just want to see God be glorified.
Yes, and he's glorified how? By people giving up their lives for the sake of God's ambitions. And it doesn't mean they have to be in full-time gospel work, but what it does mean, maybe to say it this way, the ethical response to being a Christian, like my moral ethical response has to include me passing on the faith to others.
Yes.
In various ways.
That's
it has
right.
to.
That's right.
It can't be this. I'll get my personal morals in place, and then once that's there, I'll start thinking about other people. Yeah. The essence of being a Christian is other person-centeredness. Yeah,
that's right.
And so this starts it starts being before 5th grade, but it can't be like, let's spend their formative years thinking about, okay, make sure you say your prayers and you have your personal devotions and come to church.
Yes.
And then later on as they mature. No, it's all this is happening. That is important, as well as, hey, would you pray in front of a group?
Yes.
Okay, I'm scared, but I want to try. I'll help you. Or I'm going to some event at my school. I have someone who came up to me. She's in 8th grade, and she said, can I get some 2 Ways to Live tracts? Because I'm going to put them in my softball team's bags.
Wow.
And
that's it. That's getting it. I think of like the necessity of a gardener continuing to tend their plants and their food, their vegetables, especially if their life depends upon it, right? They get nourishment and food from these crops that they're growing. And if they don't tend, if they don't strategize, or they don't take care of them, the life isn't going to continue, right? They need to continue caring and cultivating. Could we go as extreme to say, like, the church could not exist if we don't have youth ministry, intentional youth ministries, caring and cultivating? Of course, the Lord builds his church, and the Lord uses us in that way. But if we're not intentionally bringing up the next leaders, there will be no leaders.
Well, and that's why I'm so excited about this podcast, is because one of the 3 words I said when we began this is we want this to be contextual, right? The context where we're at, where the 3 of us work in Canfield, Ohio. I kind of joke around that it's kind of like Mayberry, like it's very like sin is rampant here, but it's still culturally, we're trying to figure out what that looks like. But when we think about that, we believe that if the common denominator is God using his word to change people, that can work in every context. Yeah. And like I heard a missionary one time who was on the other side of the world saying, like, maybe I could phrase it as, if they were doing this type of gardening, the ground was so hard where they were at, they're just taking rocks and throwing it, hoping that it breaks the ground, right? Like the ground context might be fertile in one area, not in others. But yeah, if we're not eyeing the next generation and thinking, what does it look like in 5, 10, 50 years? I mean, what are we really doing? And that's why I always say, I have a friend of mine, OG long-term youth pastor, only at 2 or 3 churches his whole time. But there came a time where his boss, the senior pastor at his church, was a student who used to come to his youth group. Yeah. And I always say that to me is just like a moment where it's like, even humbling for him, I'm sure, to be like, wow, now this kid, like I knew what he was like then, and now he's my boss. Yeah. But when the focus isn't on position, and when the focus isn't on what priority I have, but the focus is on, Ephesians 2:10, that God has the good work planned for us, that we should walk in them. Our goal shouldn't be to climb a ladder. Our goal should be to faithfully, Cy and I joke around a lot. Basically, when I get tired or overwhelmed, I just hold my breath and run through walls. Like resting is hard for me. But one thing that the Lord did over the past couple years is I was reading a resource, and it was talking about Ephesians 2:10. For we are the NLT uses the word masterpiece. For we are His masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. And I think it's intentional that obviously the word walk is used here because we're not trying to force something. God already has it planned, and we should walk in it. And so let's transition this thinking about this podcast called Youth Ministry in the Vine. That's because Marty, Matthias Media, Marty came into my office one day and said, Kyle, can you maybe write a resource for us? And it was shocking. Tell me why you asked me to write a resource.
Okay. So this actually could, in one way, we could have a really good conversation about ministry models. Let me just pause on that. But let me say, the reason I asked you is because I think that the Trellis and Vine, which we'll explain here in a minute, is a book.
Yep.
Is a book.
Got it right here. Got both of them.
Yeah, is a book. And the thing I say all the time about Trellis Vine, it's not a model of ministry.
Yep.
It's a framework, a mind shift to thinking about ministry, thinking about what are the key ingredients for ministry, whether it's for 5th graders, 12th graders, 45-year-olds and up. What are the
retired people?
It doesn't matter. The same thing happens, right? Yep. And so that is really hard, and I think it's especially hard in youth ministry landscape. So this is dating me very much so, but when I got into youth ministry...
You say 1900 again. That music's going to play in my mind.
25 years ago, not quite. I read a book that talked about the models of youth ministry, and there was like the attractional model, the safe space model. I don't know if that's still kind of in the parlance.
Still in the conversation, yeah.
And that's all fine and well, can be helpful. But what I think it's similar to our previous conversation. What I think happens is we think, okay, my goal is to find the right model that best fits my context and do it. The problem with that is it never quite works out that well.
Yeah.
We're not trying to instill a model of ministry. We're trying to have the right framework and the ingredients, and then from there contextualize. And while that might not seem hugely different, it actually is. And so what I saw in what the youth ministry was going on at Old North was that it had the right ingredients of ministry. Personal ministry, around the Bible, depending on God in prayer for His Spirit to work, and involving people more than just you as the leaders. And so I said, Kyle, I thought Kyle gets it, and we need youth ministries to really get it.
Yeah.
So that's why.
Yeah, and it's kind of a full circle moment for me. So here I'm holding the Trellis and the Vine, which is called The Ministry Mind Shift That Changes Everything by Colin Marshall and Tony Payne. And then when I started, I never wanted to be a youth pastor. I actually made a mistake when I was about to graduate with my undergraduate degree. I had people pray for me that God would give me wisdom in what I should do next in life. But I told them, I don't want to be a youth pastor. And that's always like the mistake I say, that before I knew it, I became a youth intern at a church. And I was assigned a big stack of books to read, and on it was The Trellis and the Vine. Well, I wasn't intending to stay there, but as the internship went, all of a sudden I realized this could be a long-term thing, and they hired me as a youth pastor, and the books got put aside, and I had to start planning for the fall, and this is what's going to happen. Well, several years later, when I met you at Old North, I realized you worked for Matthias Media, and I was like, I think one of the books that was assigned that I never read, and sure enough, it was this hard copy, Trellis and the Vine. So I come to Old North, and one of the first books we read together as pastors after I got there, which came up was like, I would say the outworking of the Trellis and the Vine would be the book, The Vine Project.
Yeah.
And so one of the first books that we went through as pastors when I came was The Vine Project. And then when you asked me to write, it was like, you know what, this is kind of a full circle moment, because I realized, and that's where one thing that I wanted to ask you is we had similar things. So you weren't here yet when Marty asked me to write the book. But then several months after that conversation, you came. And I don't think you had read the book before.
No.
But one thing I witnessed with you is this idea, this framework, kind of gave you language to what you were already doing, and you kind of dove in head first.
Yeah, it made it super easy to, again, if it's not built around a person, right? We're not building our own ministries as a church, but continuing after the gospel and word centeredness. So it gives you language to help train people, to help build people up, and help them too see the vision down the road of where they're going. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, just past couple of weeks, seeing one of our leaders, it start to click for them, and they were teaching and getting a little frustrated with maybe one of the other leaders, and you know, kind of wrestling through some distant things. I was like, hey, that was you, by the way. That was you 5 years ago, 4 years ago, right? And it takes time. We all take time and patience and prayer. But for everyone to have the vision and the understanding of, hey, it's more than us, it's bigger than us, and to help people process that. It made it easy.
Yeah, and so this idea, we have the Vine Project, which is the outworking of Trellis and the Vine, and the book that Marty asked me to write, which eventually is titled Youth Ministry in the Vine, a ministry mind shift for ministering to the next generation. Marty, can you help those who are listening or watching just kind of know this idea of the trellis and the vine? We got that's what we have. Yeah. We have the trellis and we have the vine.
Right. And for us, we kind of know it. Yep. And there is a great value of shared language. When we say trellis and vine, we immediately know what we're thinking. And that's a great benefit, as I've heard from hundreds of churches read through this in their leadership teams or youth ministry teams, and just having shared language. Right. But okay, if you don't know what this means, what does it mean? As a whole, I mean, very much in a nutshell, trellis and vine represents the things that ministry represent. The vine is the growth of the gospel as God's word is proclaimed, taught, discussed to people, applied by the Spirit. Over time to point people to be more Christ-like. So you think about the Word of God to the people of God, or the people who we want to be of God, over time, such that they become more like Jesus. Right. I know it's like simple. When we also like, well, the author Tony Payne, who I know quite well, will say when he wrote the book, he's like, we never thought it was going to be a big deal because we're just saying the plain, dumb, obvious, as he says. No offense. But he said, we're just saying the plain, dumb, obvious is that ministry is about word, prayer, and people over time. But so that the vine work represents the idea that as we apply the word of God, teach the word of God to people, God will grow them through his Spirit over time.
Yeah, and so at Old North, a lot of times we call the vine work, we call that people work.
People work. Right. Yeah, so it's not just like being in a good relationship, right? Like we're all working with different, on a spectrum. With some people, ministry is teaching the Bible. And to those people, I want to say, no, you're not teaching the Bible, you're teaching people. Right? Because that's your goal is not just to teach the Bible.
That's right.
Your goal is to teach people, and we use the inspired, powerful Word of God to teach people. But on the other side, we have people who are naturally really relational. But when we say, but what is, as Paul instructs the people in Colossians, right, that make the most use of your time, let your speech, your words always be gracious, seasoned with salt. So it's the both thing. Gracious, a good, kind, gospel collegiality and congeniality, but also seasoned with salt. And so vine work is that salty, distinct, gracious people work that point people to God. Then maybe you say, but how does that happen? When does that happen? Where does that happen? We would say that's the trellis. Right? The trellis is your Wednesday night group. The trellis is the structures in which that word, prayer, and people over time happens.
Yeah, so I wrote a couple of them down. The trellis would be like the Sunday school class, or the youth group time, or the one-to-one, the mission trip, the events. These are trellises on which the vine grows.
And you think about youth ministries, particularly ripe for us thinking rightly, properly, faithfully about good ministry, because it's so easy to get fixated on the trellis. Like if you want this is what youth ministry proliferates, right? You go to conferences and you're like, our youth ministry grew because we did this. And it's a trellis. And it could work temporarily, but it really comes back to, are we after the right growth? Trellis growth would be, we got a lot of kids. Vine growth is, we've got kids who are growing to be more like Jesus.
Yeah, and I think this, as I was writing, it came to life to me. Olivia, who was working at the church at the time, now she still serves as one of our volunteers. We're talking about this. I'm writing, and she said, "Kyle, I have this garden, and I had a plant that could have grown more, but I didn't have a trellis." And it just kind of helped things come to life, where it's like the plant in the garden, there was growth, but if there was a trellis, it could have grew more. Yeah. But at the other extent, we don't usually put trellises out there just to have trellises to look at. That's not normally what we have, right? The trellis is there for the vine. And so that's where, when we think about this idea of trellis and the vine, Marty, you've now, through Matthias, trained a lot of people. What do you see as, when you're training people, and some of them might be youth workers or just ministry workers in general, what are kind of light bulb moments that you see happen when you share this idea of trellis and vine?
I think couple light bulb moments. One would be that ministry is about. I say this to be a little bit provocative, but it's still true.
You're allowed to, Mark.
Sorry. Ministry is one of the things you're trying to do. Let's just say, as a youth minister, is to always figure out how to replace yourself.
Yes.
Meaning, what's underneath that is that it's not about a personality driven.
Yes.
Now, of course, God uses personalities. You're different than me.
Yep.
And praise God for that.
Yes.
You probably are looking at me.
Well, our wives are
Marty. Right. Thank God for that. So it's so one light bulb moment is to say, "Great, Cy, you're really doing well. Praise God. Keep going. Who's going to replace you?"
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But then you get underneath even that and say, I must build a youth ministry trellis that has to be transferable, regardless of who's in charge, regardless of the budget, regardless of the circumstance. Mm-hmm. And so then it gets you thinking about first principles, right? And that's where I think the light bulb goes off, is like, what are first principles of ministry? And again, it's back to what I said earlier, word, prayer, people over time. And so those are light bulb moments, people thinking that, you mean I don't have to do what they're doing down there?
Correct.
Well, you might be able to learn something, and there might be some really good, wise things that they're doing that you could bring over, but no, you don't. You have to do what's best for the people in front of you, so that the vine grows. Yeah. And vine growth is not measured necessarily by numbers.
Yeah, and Cy, we see this all the time as we talk to youth pastors and youth workers.
And it's so encouraging to me and calming, really, as a youth pastor, to be like, wait, this comparison culture that we get in so much in the West, kills that. Yeah. And even in churches, that happens. And I kind of want to throw a question back at you, Pastor Kyle, since you've seen so much and know so many. I think of the youth worker right now that's maybe even listening to this, and they're like, well, crap, I have too big of a trellis, or I have no trellis, or they're like, man, we're so siloed. I don't have intergenerational ministry going on right now. And they're just kind of overwhelmed. What would you say right now to encourage them, calm them down in light of all this trellis and vine language and where we'll be going?
Yeah, I think that the reason this framework works, especially well in youth ministry, is if you're willing to stay long enough, or even we'll say intend to stay long enough, if you're willing to stay long enough at one church, you don't have to blow everything up right away and start over. Now, it might be necessary to, but kind of what I've witnessed at Old North Church and then in our youth ministry at Old North Church is make changes over time. And as changes happen over time and as different trellises are built, when new trellises are built, it's easier to take other trellises away. For instance, one thing that you said earlier, Marty, was about this Equip conference we have. It's a conference we have that now, as we're recording this, we're about to have the 5th annual Equip conference. It started, I'm meeting with your son at Panera, and this was like freshman son of yours, not now freshman college.
Yeah, very different.
And I can remember sitting there in Panera, it might have been before I had the SIP club. Eventually I got the SIP club because I was like, I'm meeting Malachi here every week. It's going to save money by getting the SIP club, right? And plus my daughter memorized my cell phone because as I kept going through the Panera drive-thru, I'm like, how do you know? She's like, Dad, you say it at Panera. I'm like, okay. But anyways, I'm sitting at Panera and waiting for him to come, and I typed out on a Google Doc, this is what an apologetic type conference could be. Now, this isn't exactly a trellis, but in one sense it is. It's a program that we're gonna train kids, a one-day event, And we said, we'll do it for us and invite others. Well, before we know it now, this is our 5th time. We have 51 churches coming, over 600 students and leaders. Once this got going, it was easier to take away other trellises that maybe even other people in the church liked more than this because they got behind something that was happening. And so one thing I would say to those who are listening is that figure out a couple trellises that you want to build. One thing we did is we built a 1-to-1 Bible reading program very quickly. I thought, you know what? If personal and intentional discipleship is one of the core values of our church, let's get kids in the Bible. Well, we had leaders read the Bible with students, very easy. You know, we'll talk about this more in future episodes. But as that got going, it was easier then to take away other trellises that over time, I think one thing that Pastor Nick, our senior pastor, taught me is in some sense, as change happens in churches, there are those who have long memories, but as change happens, people can forget what did happen and get excited about what's happening now. And that's where I think this trellis in the vine mindset and framework works well in student ministry because there are so many exciting trellises that we can build. But I think to what you said earlier, Sai, I think as the youth worker, it can be hard to look over there and be like, you know, we find, and Marty, you might have experienced this too with others, whenever we tour other churches or have people tour our churches, they're always like, I wish I had this youth room. And, you know, our friend Mike at Parkside Green, he comes into our great room and he's like, I wish I had this. And I'm like, dude, last time we were at your church, I'm like, you have your own building? Greener. You have your own youth? And he's like, no, I don't want that. I want what you have. And so what I think I've realized is we need to not worry so much about comparison. And if the baseline of ministry is people, which is what we keep saying, right? People, prayer, word over time. If youth ministry is just younger people, right? Like I said, the noun pastor is more important than the adjective youth. Let's build trellises so they can grow. And maybe I'm biased, but I mean, I think we would all agree. Like, this is why youth ministry is awesome. Yeah. Like part of the reason I stay in youth ministry is I want to teach minds that are forming. You know, we what do we say? Wet cement. Yep.
So putting the rods. I was just talking to a parent this week, and to where it's depending on the issue, right? Sometimes it blows up in their mind. Sometimes it becomes so big, whether it's, oh, my friend's not talking to me anymore, or this type of bullying scenario, or this type of thing. But it's an opportunity in their young minds. We can easily go, yeah, you know what? Let's ignore it, move it on. But because they're wet cement, it's an opportunity to build in these rods of faith that help them build on a foundation of Christ that lasts them hopefully into the future.
Which I just briefly, because it's encouraging to me, and I think it'll be to the listeners. Just explain quickly why you're a youth pastor. You're a middle school Bible teacher?
Middle school Bible teacher? Oh, yeah. I mean, I grew up in a Christian home and had no idea what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a physical therapist actually for a while. Because I want to help people. I knew what I wanted to do.
Pistol squats.
Yeah. That's what the convincing thing was. Yeah. Sheesh. But seeing, one of my teachers exemplify the care and the intentionality of pouring into us, I was like, I want to do that. I don't want to be a pastor. I made the same mistake. God, don't make me a pastor, but I want to teach the Bible. I want to help. Like, that was such a formational time for me, and I wanted to be able to do that for others and help people.
Yeah. Can I just ask you guys both questions?
No. Just him.
You guys both grew up in church, in good, solid Christian churches.
Yep.
What's something that you would say that, because it's easy to think about back, and I had the same thing of things that I was part of in my youth ministry growing up that I rejected. Yep. Like, I don't want to do that. But what would be something that you have done, respectively, that is very similar to something you grew up with, but because you have maybe a more robust philosophy of ministry of what we've been talking about, it looks similar, but it has a different emphasis, or it takes on a different shape or form because of that. And maybe that's too much on the spot, but because that's the question's driving at an idea that this thinking doesn't necessarily mean redo things way differently than other people. Actually, our ministries look very similar. Yeah. But they have a different, I don't know, the guts of them are different. So I don't know if there's...
Yeah, I think for me, one thing is I didn't realize how good of a youth ministry I grew up in until I became a youth pastor. And I was like, wow, I realized a lot of what I was doing was what I grew up in. But I think for me, to answer your question, I think one thing that I realized the longer, and even through writing this book has helped me process through like, what do I actually believe and the why behind the what is I think I underplayed before how we measure results. And I realize now that as I run the youth ministry here at Old North Church, working specifically with high school students, is I'm doing a lot of the same things that my youth group did growing up, but I'm not as worried as I thought that I would be about what the outworking of that looks like. Mm-hmm. For instance, we have a calendar of events, and we used to do mission trips, and I think I'm still pro mission trips for students. But I realized that if we have some kids at a Christian school, they go on a mission trip, and when I came here, we'd have a ton of events over the summer. And it was like, this is good, but we didn't have one core thing we were all doing together. So we started going to a camp together and so it was like, you know what, for me, I guess, as you said, Si, this mindset, this framework is actually freeing for me to realize I don't need to make things look a certain way just to please people. I don't need to have a mission. Like, I think one of the best things my youth group did growing up is we had a 3-phase mission trip. You first did a local one, and then you did one national, and then you went international. Like I did Evangelical Free Church of Hershey. We would do like vacation Bible schools. So we'd stay at a local campground, then go do vacation Bible schools. Then I went to New Orleans and did hurricane relief, and then I went to the jungles of Peru, like legit far out. They'd look at me and be like, you are taller than anyone we've seen. Like as a high schooler, but like local, national, internet. Like I would love to have that on our calendar right now. But one thing the Lord has helped me with this mindset, with this framework, is realizing I'm not doing things to check boxes. I'm doing things to grow people. So if I only get one swing and it happens to be summer camp, maybe 5 years from now or 10 years from now, we won't do summer camp and we'll all go on mission trips. But that was one thing. I don't know. Si, anything come to mind for you?
Yeah, no, it's funny you asked that question because, I mean, the church I grew up at, the church my grandparents helped start and my family is still at, is very similar flavor to Old North. And the first thing that kind of came to mind, which is such a weird, small example, was like me sitting in the main service taking notes. Wow. And just initially started with me just drawing on the note page that they provided. And I have students to this day that come and show me the cool drawings, which is honestly kind of fascinating how they can draw so much with just a pen in middle school. But I was there and I did the exact same thing, but being under the word every single week and the word centeredness that was drilled into me. And that fruit, I think, it took time. Like you didn't see it right away in my life at all. But because those rhythms were set in place from my family, from my church, that continued to produce fruit. And really, I could probably reflect on this question for hours and realize, wait, that's where that comes from.
Yes, that's right.
And so that was just kind of the first thing that came to mind for me. So that's a great question.
So let's go into a little bit of a rapid fire.
Yep.
We're not landing the plane yet. We're getting closer to landing the plane. But episode 1, which we're doing now, is the first of season 1, which is Welcome to Youth Ministry in the Vine. And as I said in the beginning, this is kind of like the home team. Si and I are together all week doing youth ministry together. We're part of a family ministry team, which we'll talk about in future episodes. And then Marty, with you being a coworker, because one of the things we say at Old North is, and I think it's part of the intergenerational, not age, but if we think about our different roles on team, we have half walls rather than full walls. Yeah. So we're doing ministry, we're teaching adult classes, Pastor Justin's teaching at the Equip Conference, all of this. But you've seen this from a different angle too. So let's just go down through a few of these youth ministry in the Vine ideas. And we can all weigh on them. So, we don't have to be quick, but don't write the dissertation, Si. So the first thing I want to throw out, starting to you, Marty, is one of the ideas in youth ministry in the Vine and the Trellis in the Vine mindset is that when we're recruiting volunteers, we're not just filling holes, but we're actually training people.
Yeah, that's one in chapter 2 of Trellis and Vine, which gets the most kind of eye catch because people they go from filling gaps, filling holes to training people. And everyone who reads that mind shift says, yeah, that's what we want. Yes. But I don't know how to get there because, fine, I can go meet with Kyle, seems like a keen young guy, and he can help out with youth ministry. But I still got someone to volunteer on Wednesday nights.
Yes, that's right.
And so, but I think where do you go with all of this? I think start with one person and I say this quite regularly. Start with non-role specific training.
Yes.
Because our goal is not just to fill the holes. Our goal is to say, Kyle, as you as a Christian should be serving God by serving others with the word, the gospel of Jesus Christ, regardless of whether you help out in that youth ministry or not. So it's playing the long game. Yeah. So, but it's a mind shift and say, I'm going to start, instead of just finding the gap, filling the gap, I'm going to start with one person.
And I think you're right, because the hole is still there.
The hole is still
we
there.
need someone to be there. I don't know. So I would.
Yeah. I mean, if you're just trying to fill gaps, it becomes way more exhausting.
Yeah.
Because the gap, regardless of the size, where is that, like, you have to figure out where that person, what their shape is, so to say, to fit them where they fit best.
Yeah.
And to know how you need to shape them and encourage them and shepherd them and care for them. And so it's exhausting if you're just plugging and chugging and you're just trying to make cookie cutter type responses and results. But instead, if you're trying to learn people and understand, it takes more work, but it's more rewarding, as opposed to, yes, still exhausting, but exhausting with not any result or promise of future.
And Marty, can you just speak to, as you were saying that, Si, it was helping me remember that, this is crazy that we give our lives to this. But this is why I think more youth pastors and youth workers need to realize the value of what they do. Because although the target audience is the teenager, you're also discipling the adult leader who's going to help you disciple the kid. So it's not like I'm just doing youth ministry. It's actually, I'm doing ministry.
Yeah. A word we use a lot in our training is concurrence. Yeah. Something you can do both things at the same time. So you can actually train someone for the sake of developing them as a Christian and potentially fill that gap.
Yes.
But I think what you don't want is bait and switch and say, hey, I'm just going to train you as a Christian. Oh, by the way, can you help out here? And at the same time, okay, I just want to pause, make sure I say this because it's fleeting. Pick up on what you said. It's not just it's rewarding to be, not to be overly sober, but it's dangerous. Yeah. There's a lot at risk by filling gaps with people we don't necessarily know. And again, praise God that many of us have been shielded from the stories we've heard, but we do know the stories and they're true. And it's not just like, yes, it's rewarding, it's great, it's good, but it's the best thing for the students to put someone in, to fill that gap with someone who is, we know that is maturing and is fighting sin and putting on righteousness, as opposed to someone who's got all the external qualities, but we're not really sure. They're young. That's the classic example, right? Someone's young, shows up to your church. Like, man, they've got time. They don't have kids yet. Maybe they're not married yet. They've got the energy. Kids like them, put them in that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And boy, that's...
Which we work with people in process. We're willing to do that. But there's still a responsibility as leaders, as we care for them and put people in front of them, right, to do our due diligence, whether that's small things of, even at our own church, waiting 6 months or so as they're around to eventually put them into a ministry, to see their investment, to see their growth.
Yeah.
Like, time is our friend here. To be able to see the fruit grow in their life.
And so when we think about this leads to a second question I have. I have a sign. I meant to bring it in here, but classic. I mean, this is so those who are listening or watching, like, we're just normal. Like, I have a sign in my office and I'm pretty sure it fell behind my bookshelf. So I was going to bring it in here, but I have to move all my books to move the bookshelf. But it's a sign that says, don't forget the church kids. And I think that in the youth ministry world, sometimes we can say we want to go save every teen. I mean, my phrase that I use is in my office is we want every student in every school to know the gospel. They might not believe the gospel, but that's my prayer. God, would you help every student in every school to know the gospel? But the reason I have this sign, don't forget the church kids, is this trellis and the vine mindset so important that we need to make sure that the kids who grow up in our church actually know the gospel. So you want to...
I don't know why I keep going back to this gardening metaphor. Maybe it's the vine. It's just really ingrained in me right now. Here's what. No, I'm not. Period. First off, but what it made me think of was these plants I have in my home. Right, it's so much more exciting to get a new plant and be like, oh wow, let me care for it. Wow, this one looks different and it's got these different qualities and things like that's a little more exciting at first, right? But I have this plant that I've had since we got married. Just this whole like generational thing of getting passed on, and I'm like, I kind of want that plant to die because I'm just done taking care of it, right? And that kind of sometimes how we treat students. We're just like, man, it's easier, it's more exciting when there's a new thing. It's a new student. Wow, they're really on fire for Christ right away. There's a lot of quick growth, but then something that's maybe older or takes more time with longer people, or you don't see the quick growth that you saw at first, right? It gets more discouraging and more challenging. And that's where it's tricky to stay around for the long haul. But that doesn't mean, again, we should forget the church kids, or forget the kids that have been around and have been in the ground for so long.
Right.
And not to make it personal, but like, Colleen, my daughter, will raise her hand for every question you ask. Every time.
I can count
and so
on her
you're like,
for sure.
I know that. And I know you care for her. So, but there is a sense you're like, it's exciting when that kid who never raised hand.
Right.
And of course there's a truth to that we want to honor.
Right.
But it is rightfully so easy to think, like, I know she'll raise her hand.
Right.
What about these people?
Yeah. And it's so crucial. So let's switch from thinking about those who already are Christians. We'll do an episode here in season 1 thinking about those who are not yet Christians. We need to engage and evangelize them. Marty, one thing you've been super helpful with me thinking through youth ministry is so many youth ministries, and I think just ministries in general, but I think especially youth ministries, think that we're evangelizing, but actually we're just brushing up against the gospel rather than explaining the gospel itself. And an example that I'll share, and then Marty, I just want to hear some of your wisdom on this because you're the one who told me it. But when I think about doing evangelistic work in youth ministry, sometimes we'll call it evangelism, people coming into church to an event. And sure, in one sense, evangelism might be happening. They might meet Christians and share the gospel that way or things like that. But we need to make sure that if we're saying we're doing evangelism, we're actually proclaiming the gospel message to them.
Yes, I think that is a huge one, right? That I know that I'll just use my own faults. When trying to evangelize our neighbors for the 10 years they've lived next to us, I've talked about church with them. They know what I do. But I would say, and we've talked about some spiritual things, but I've never evangelized them because I've never talked about what they owe the Lord, their creator, and their sin, their pending judgment, and the necessity to put their life in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
And so I've never evangelized them. So using that to say, my fault, I'm still working on it. Being in a church is not evangelizing. Talking about Christian things is not specifically evangelizing.
Right. And that's where I have learned over time that one of the main things I'm doing as the youth pastor is if I'm there and I'm teaching our high school students, is I'm trying to convince some of them that they're not Christians so that then they can become Christians. Because so many kids can grow up in the church today. I always say I was a church kid when I was in my mom's womb. When I was in my mom's womb, I was in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, right? And that's how some of the kids are who are in our youth ministries right now. And they might assume that they're Christians, but they've never been converted. And so when I'm teaching in a way, now these are church kids, don't forget the church kids, but they're likely unconverted church kids. We want to convince them, not in a mean way. This is actually the most loving thing we can do, to ask questions when we're teaching students to help them think, maybe I've never actually put my faith and trust in Jesus. Maybe I think I'm a Christian because my parents are Christians. And we want to make sure, A, that we don't forget the church kids, but B, that both in our outreach events and in our week-to-week teaching, that we're actually proclaiming the message of Jesus Christ.
And really, they're getting evangelized in a general sense every day, all the time.
Yes.
There's always other news that's getting blasted at them, other messages they're told to believe and to trust. And so, especially some that are even closer to the gospel than we'd like it to be, whether it's a self-help idea or angle, but we want to be very explicit and clear on what the Bible is explicit and clear on, or else we're doing them a disservice and really failing them as their leader.
That's why one of the questions I think is especially, I like asking this for anybody. Of course, the question, how you became a Christian is great.
Yes.
Of course. But I also like asking, how are you growing as a Christian? Because that showcases, like, you're growing as a Christian as you think about and apply the gospel every day.
Yeah.
And, it would be fascinating to hear what an 8th grader would say, what an 11th grader would say is, how are you growing as a Christian? And some of them, we know, with like, I don't know. And some of them would really get it. The other thing too, just on your point, is I think he got this from someone, but I heard it first from Don Carson, right? The first generation contends for the gospel. The second generation assumes the gospel. The third generation gives up the gospel.
Yes.
And so his point is never assume it. And the guy who kind of inspired the Charleston Vine thinking, of course it's the Bible, but the one that Tony and Colin Marshall, co-authors of the book, lived under, is a guy named Philip Jensen. And he spent 50 years doing campus ministry as well as pastoring.
In Australia?
In Australia, in Sydney, Australia. And he would always say, the most charitable thing you can do for someone is not assume they're a Christian. And it's always one of those, wait, what? But his point is, because if you assume they're a Christian, you won't speak the gospel to them.
Yeah.
But the most loving thing you can do is we think that's counterintuitive. It can be mean. But if the gospel is the greatest news ever, how could it be mean to say it to someone? Yeah. And then another layer of this is why we are set aside to do gospel work, is we get the charge to creatively think about the many different ways we can say the same thing.
Yes.
Of course, when we say preach the gospel, teach the gospel always, we're not saying use the exact same words. Yeah. Even as much as I love 2 Ways to Live, we wouldn't say just read 2 Ways to Live every week.
Single time.
No, but we still preach the gospel every time we open our mouths with the word of God. It's just our charge is to be faithful and creative in doing that.
Yeah, that's so good. Which ties in well. The last phrase I want to do in this rapid fire before I ask you guys each one last question is in Trellis and the Vine, this framework, which how did you land on framework? I just, it's different than model.
Yeah, I don't like the word framework.
This is a bonus question.
I don't like the word framework, but can't come up with this.
Yes.
Basic, because framework is the idea is like the framework has to be there.
Yes.
Whether you want to put up,
Yeah, they're building a wall in my house right now because we just
Do you want a drywall? Do you want wainscoting? Do you want plaster? Like, that's up to you, and make the base decision what you want. But the framework has to be there and be the same.
Okay, so
I can't come up
that
with
framework,
a
a phrase that is within that framework that comes out of one of the books that we've talked about is that I just want to throw out to you guys is not just solving people's problems, but helping them make progress. How does that tie into youth ministry, Si? Helping them make progress.
I think, it's the old adage of teaching them to fish and not just giving them a fish, right? Because you're preparing them for hopefully Christian maturity for the years ahead. And as they're wet cement, as they're growing, as they're at this key time, right? You want to teach them those skills, the biblical skills, the Christ honoring bent to their life that they can learn at a young age and should learn at a key time of their life too.
How about you, Marty?
My quick would be to say that having anyone not looking at pornography, not gossiping, not cheating, that's not growth. That's euphemistically it's preventing negative growth.
Okay.
But so like just getting them to put off, Paul uses put off, put on language. So we want to not just help them not sin, but to actually pursue righteousness.
Yeah, it's almost like I think of my own upbringing in my church and in my family, and then how I tend to lead students is I can accidentally actually create little Pharisees. Yeah. Like you just said, where they know what to put off, but they don't know what to put on.
Yeah, and I think I'm doing well. It is. It's a huge part of it. Absolutely. So back to what we were saying before, though, my ethical response, my response to the gospel is not just put off, but it's how can I proclaim Jesus? How can I bring everyone with me in the pursuit of righteousness? How can I do all these things out of love of God and love of others? And so when we focus on problem-based ministry, we're only focused on part of the maturing process, putting off.
Yes.
But when we focus on growing people, is this, and again, I think, and this is a whole nother episode, right? What is it that we're after?
Yeah.
Like, what does a maturing student look like?
Right.
We have to have that crystallized. Otherwise, we will just result to putting out the problems, whether it's from the parents or the students, of all the negative things.
Yeah.
But we have to be pursuing growth.
Yeah, that statement, not just solving people's problems, but helping them make progress, as we've already said. And it fits the whole gardening idea. It takes time, right? It takes time for something to grow. If something grows too quick, it might not even be healthy.
Yes.
So... Okay, so one last question I'm going to ask you, all three of us, to answer in a moment, is why it's worth thinking strategically and critically about youth ministry. But as you guys think about your answer, I do want to remind those who are listening and watching just to subscribe to this podcast on YouTube or whatever your favorite podcast platform is. I do want to remind you also that the heartbeat behind this is not just for the youth pastor, but it's also for your volunteers. So as you've listened and as you've watched to this first episode, season 1 is all going to be an introduction to this mindset, to this framework, as we've been talking about. So please don't be afraid to share this with your volunteers and with others who may be in your local network of youth pastors, as we do not have it figured out, but we believe that this youth ministry is worth it. Which is the last question. Si, we'll start with you. We'll go Si and then Marty and then myself. Why is it worth thinking strategically and critically about youth ministry?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of reiterating what we've said, that the future of the church is at stake.
Yeah.
And that if we don't, who will? They already are getting all these other voices in their life.
Yep.
And so there isn't a question of who will. We know who will.
Yeah.
It's all these other voices that they're getting. And so to have the voice of the Lord through his word and through his spirit working through us, like that's the greatest thing that we can do for them. I don't know if it's what Piper that says one of the greatest gifts we can give our people is our own personal holiness, and the importance of our work coming from that, in the sense that we're not finding our worth in what we get to do for our church or for our people or for our students, but we're working out of the identity we have in God. And that should be true of us if we're trying to lead our students into that as well.
Yeah, that's good.
That's well said. You mentioned it earlier. This is a unique and it's important time. Yeah. I mean, statistically, right? If someone doesn't become a Christian by age of 18, they won't. Yeah. I'm not ever,
course,
but it's just in the minority. Yeah. Now, again,
God can blow it all up. Yep.
But there's a lot there.
Yeah.
And so we've got this opportunity that is essential in this time of life to reach them for the gospel. And so,
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is, as Marty, you alluded to earlier, is oftentimes in youth ministry, what happens is, and it happened to me, I was 22 when I became a youth pastor. I mean, I wasn't even, our current church where we rent vans from, I wouldn't even be able to drive a rental van with the insurance policy that you have to be 25. And so oftentimes what happens in youth ministry is we take the least experienced person or the least competent person and put them with what today is, I think, one of the hardest ministries. You know, I just recently, a good friend of mine, we go on vacation sometimes over the summer, and just 8 months ago from the time of this recording, I took a picture of the picture on our fridge, and I was like, this is your son 8 months ago. And he's like a complete different individual now, right? Because teenagers, their bodies are changing, their emotions are changing, spiritually they're changing. And so I think why it's worth thinking strategically about this is although no matter where we find ourselves when we start in youth ministry, me as a 22-year-old who didn't even want to be a youth pastor, to now those who are listening and watching wherever they're at, is I think it's worth growing because these are real people. You know, it's not just like writing a seminary paper or a Bible college paper. These are real teenagers. And we're going to do an episode here in season 1 about partnering with parents. And these are someone's children. That there are moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles who are praying that God would save these kids. And we might never even know. I think about a family that I'm ministering to right now who the parents aren't Christians, but the grandma's a Christian. And I just wish that grandma knew that I was able to minister to that grandchild. And so I think it's worth it because they're real people who will spend eternity in either heaven or hell, and we get to help shape the next generation.
And I can speak as the old man of the group. You guys who have young kids, they will be adults soon. Yeah.
That is crazy.
I mean, they will, and it goes fast, and like every old person says. Yeah. But yes.
Well, Cy, Marty, thank you for joining me for the very first Youth Ministry in the Vine podcast episode. Season 1, we're going to be looking at all of this. Again, to those who are listening and watching, you can find all the information about the book that's coming out and about just different resources that are helpful. But subscribe, and we'll be with you next time.